I'm going to show you how timeXtender's data warehouse automation platform helps users perform a number of standard data warehousing tasks in a BI environment. So we're going to take a requirement that came from a user. She wants to see the sales by item, customer, and by time. So to be able to deliver this report to her, I'll start by creating the dimensional model in the data warehouse. Then I'll build my cubes, and then I'll do the ETL work. So for my dimensional modeling, I'm going to add first my dim date. I'm going to set the date range that we're going to be working within. I'm going to select the levels of detail that we want to see in our date dimension. I'm going to add the additional tables that we're going to need in our data warehouse, the dim item, the dim customer, the fact sales. For each of these tables, I'm going to add the necessary fields. So for dim item, we're going to add the item number, item description, and item group. For the customer, I'm going to add customer number, customer name, country, and state. For the fact sales table, I'm going to add an amount field, a date field, and the surrogate key references to my item dimension and to my customer dimension. So that's my data warehouse structure. The only thing I need to do here is set up the relationships between the tables. So the date value goes to the date in the fact table. The surrogate key from the item table goes to the surrogate key item in the fact table. And the same goes for the customer dimension. So now my dimensional model in my data warehouse is complete, and I can continue to create my cube. To do so, I'll open the data warehouse that I just created in a new window here, and I'll use drag and drop to create the dimensions and cubes that I'm going to need. I'm going to create my item dimension, select the attributes that I want to create. I'll do the same for my customer dimension. Select the attributes I want to use. And my date dimension. I'm going to set up hierarchies for each of these dimensions. So for my date dimension, I'm going to set up a calendar hierarchy, year, quarter, month, day. For my customer dimension, I'm going to set up a customer by country, which goes country, state, and customer. And for my item dimension, I'm going to set up a hierarchy that is by group, and that'll be item group and item description. Then I'm going to create my cube. It's going to be a sales cube with the fact sales as my only fact table for now. We are going to add each of our 3 dimensions to this cube. The tool will recognize the relations from the data warehouse and use these to relate the dimensions to the cube. And I'm going to create my amount measure. So now I've created my data warehouse structure and my cube structure. So what I need to do now is I need to map some data into this model. For the purpose of this demonstration, I will use Dynamics AX data source. I could choose any data source, either just based on a basic database connection like SQL, Oracle, DB2, etc. Or I can use any of our application adapters. So for this, I'm going to use our AX adapter. I'm going to give this connector a name. and I'm going to set up a connection to a SQL database where I will extract the AX data from. I'll select the companies that I want to extract data from, and I'll right-click and read the objects from the data source. To populate my data warehouse, I'm going to need to extract the right tables from my data source. So for my dimension item table, I'm going to need my invent table. From this table, I'm going to need my item ID, I'm going to need my item name, and I'm going to need my item group ID. For my dim customer, I'm going to need the cost table. From the cost table, I'm going to need the account number, the name, the country region ID, and the state. For the country name, I'm going to need the address country region table, and from this table I'm going to need the name and the country region ID. For my fact table, I'm going to need my cost invoice transaction table. For my transaction level information, this is going to be my line amount MST, my item ID, my invoice ID, invoice date, and my sales ID. And my header level table is the cost invoice journal. This is where I get my order account from. I'll also need the fields to relate it to my line level, which will be invoice ID, invoice date, and sales ID. So what I need to do now is I need to denormalize the table structure in the staging area before I load it into the data warehouse. So the first thing I need to do is I need to denormalize the customer table and address country region relationship here. So I set up a relationship between the two tables by dragging and dropping the field. And then I can copy the customer name and create a lookup on my customer table. And I'll rename this to country name. Secondly, I will create the relationship between the sales headers and the sales lines. The relationship goes data area ID to data area ID, invoice ID to invoice ID, invoice date to invoice date, and sales ID to sales ID. Then I can copy the customer number, which is the order account field, to that related table. So the last thing I need to do here is I need to copy my surrogate keys. So I do that by creating the relationship from the customer table, which is account num to order account, go, it's a composite key, and then I can copy the surrogate key down, which is the TDWI field, and then we have the surrogate key customer. I'll do the same for the item table here. I'll create a relationship between the two, company and the item, and then I can copy the surrogate key to the fact table. So now we've set up the fact table and the dimension tables with the structure that we want, and we can transfer them into the data warehouse. To do that, I'll just open my staging database in a new window here to the right, so I have it side by side. I can take item ID, drag it to item number, item name to item description, item group to item group, and for my customer dimension, I'll do the same here, account number to customer number, name to customer name, country name to country, and state to state. So those are my dimension tables, and the only thing I need to do now is my fact table, which is my cost invoice transactions here. The amount is the line amount MST, the date is the invoice date, and then the surrogate keys for item and customer. And that's it. Now I've mapped this model to the data warehouse. And all I need to do now is to just hit the manual deployment execution button and click start. This will deploy everything to SQL Server. So it will create the tables that we're going to be using. It will create the integration services, packages, stored procedures, user-defined functions, views, everything that we need to make this model happen on SQL Server. And there's no proprietary scripts or anything in there. It's all deployed directly to SQL Server, and it's all completely open, so we can go in and view the log here if we want to see what actually happened. We can see the entire SQL script that's being generated. Everything that's happening is completely accessible. Here we can open up the integration services, packages, and everything. Yeah. So now we're done, and I'll open up Excel, create a connection to the cube that we just built. And we can browse it from within here to verify that it looks like we expected it to be. We have amount by country and by state. We can look at it by time, and we can look at it by item group by item group. So now the user has a question. What happens, she asks, if an item, like for example this LCD television model 1, changes item group? How do we handle that? To handle something like that, we have to use slowly changing dimensions. So let me just show you how we implement something like that. So we want to track changes for the items on the item group level. So to do that, I go to my item table here in the staging area. I need to set up a primary key for the table first. Then I go to the advanced settings here, where I enable slowly changing dimensions. When I do that, I get to categorize every single field. So we have the natural key first, then we have the type 1 changes, which are the changes that don't trigger a new record, and then we have the type 2 changes which will trigger a new record, which is item group ID. The only thing I need to do except for that is I need to just include that in my key lookup. So apart from looking at the item ID, we also need to look at the from date time, which needs to be less or equal to the invoice date, and the to date time needs to be greater than the invoice date. There we go. So now we've implemented slowly changing dimensions for the invent table, and when I've processed the project, I'll actually make that change to the data so we can see the effect of it. So now we're running the project through, and if we refresh the data here in Excel, we can see it shows exactly the same way. So I'll go back to the data, and I'll change the item group for this item to flat screen. To see the effects of this, I also need to have a sales transaction that has been posted after today's date. I can execute my entire project again, and now we should be able to see the effects of a slowly changing dimension in our Excel report. So let's go in here, hit refresh, and we can see that now in 2014, the LCD television model 1 has moved to the flat screen, but it'll still exist for the historical record in the television group. So that's how we implement slowly changing dimensions, and that's just an example of how we approach standard data warehousing tasks like that. So now that we've completed the project development, I want to show just a couple of the documentation features of the product. So I'll go to do first an ad hoc analysis. I'll right click my customer dimension, and I'll do a full trace. And this will show me the data lineage diagram for this dimension. It'll show all the way down where each attribute comes from and what has been done to it throughout the data cleansing process. We can also create documentation for the entire project in a PDF document. I right click my project, go into documentation, and click OK. And we can review the documentation for the entire project in this PDF document. It helps tremendously with IT audits, with Sarbanes-Oxley compliance, etc. So that's what I had chosen to show you guys in this very limited time. And I hope that I've given you an idea of what our data warehouse automation platform can do. Thank you.